The ocean liner Nereid was a floating city with a population of 3,000 souls, shining with lights amidst the eternal, indifferent darkness. For Dr. Helena Shaw, it was not just a workplace but an ark, carrying her away from something she never spoke about. She was its chief physician, and everyone knew her, a tall, stern woman with streaks of gray in her black hair and eternally tired eyes. Those eyes seemed to see not only the physical ailments of the passengers, but also the shadows swimming in the depths. Beyond the portholes, she never spoke about past voyages. Any questions about her career, about previous ships, she would parry with a polite but steely smile, changing the subject to the weather or the schedule of events. Colleagues whispered that she had been hired after some incident on another liner, but no one knew the details. She was the perfect, ruthlessly professional employee, until the ship crossed a certain parallel where the water became particularly dark and cold. Then her professional calm would crack, and her gaze would become distant, as if she were listening to something that others could not hear. It was in such waters that they found themselves now. The night outside was thick as ink. Helena stood in her office, looking at her own pale reflection in the glass. Her hands were trembling. She took a deep breath, picked up the radio, and called her assistant, a young and ambitious intern named Leo. "Leo, I need your help." "In the storage room." Now, her voice was even, but there was a steel in it that brooked no argument. Leo, who was about to go to sleep, was surprised, but obediently appeared 5 minutes later. He found Helena in front of a massive, inconspicuous door in the far corner of the infirmary, behind rows of medicine cabinets. Leo didn't even remember this door ever being opened. It was old, wooden, with peeling paint and, strangest of all, boarded up with 2 thick wooden planks nailed across it in an X. It looked as if the door hadn't just been closed, but sealed. "Doctor, what is this?" asked Leo, looking perplexedly at the crowbar and flashlight in her hands. "Storage for old archives," Helena answered curtly. "Help me open it." The work was hard. The rusty nails screeched as they came out of the wood, as if unwilling to release their prey. When the last plank clattered to the floor, Helena pushed back the bolt. The door creaked open, releasing from the dark opening a wave of stale, musty air that smelled of dust, rust, and something sweetly putrid, like moldy cotton. It was cramped and dark inside. Helena turned on the flashlight. A beam of light pulled from the gloom rows of empty wooden shelves covered in a thick layer of dust. On some stood vials and flasks, but all were empty, their necks covered in cobwebs. In the corner lay a pile of rusty surgical instruments, saws, clamps, forceps of a strange, outdated shape. They looked as if they hadn't been sterilized, but simply thrown away after use. Leo felt a chill. This place didn't look like a storage room. It looked like an abandoned operating room, a crime scene that had been sealed off and forgotten. On the only table, standing in the center of the room, lay a stack of worn, leather-bound journals. Helena slowly approached them, her fingers tracing the spines, raising clouds of dust. She took the top one, the newest-looking journal, and opened it. The pages were filled with neat, familiar handwriting, Helena's own. She flipped through the pages, her face growing paler. The entries were ordinary: medication logs, vaccination lists, mild cases of seasickness. But the further she read, the more alarming the entries became. Mentions of an outbreak of unknown origin, of quarantine measures, of patients with an atavistic fear of water. And then, near the very end, she found it. An entry dated 6 months ago. The ink was the same, the handwriting was hers, but the words seemed alien, torn from a nightmare. Patient 0, high fever, unresponsive to antipyretics. White blood cells normal, no inflammatory markers. Refuses food and fresh water. demands salt water, claims to hear voices from beyond the hull, says they are calling him home, into the depths. Tonight he began answering them, whispers something in a language I don't know. The sounds resemble clicks and gurgles. I must isolate him. Complete isolation. Otherwise. The entry ended there. The next page, the one that should have contained the continuation, the conclusions, the fate of patient zero, was torn out. All that remained was a rough, jagged edge. Leo, who had been reading over the doctor's shoulder, read these lines. The blood drained from his face. Doctor ... His voice trembled. What? What happened to that patient? What does otherwise mean? Helena slowly closed the journal. She turned to Leo, and in her eyes there was no fear, no panic, not even fatigue. They were utterly empty, like the surface of a dead lake. They did not reflect the flashlight's beam, nor did they reflect Leo's face. It was a void born of despair, burned out completely. He is still on the ship. Her voice was quiet, monotone, as if stating a fact. He never leaves. He just ... retreats into the dampest, darkest corners, into the pipes, into the ballast tanks. He is waiting. Waiting for what? Whispered Leo, feeling shivers run down his spine. Waiting for the water outside to become cold and deep enough. Waiting for the ship to enter his waters. And then he comes out to visit the others. Tonight is his night for rounds. Leo wanted to say something, to ask if she had gone mad, but at that very moment, there was a knock on the infirmary's main door, the one leading to the corridor. The knock was quiet, wet, unnatural. It wasn't made by knuckles. It was soft, muffled, as if someone was knocking with something softened, swollen, waterlogged. 1, 2, 3. Leo's heart stopped. Helena froze, her empty gaze fixed on the door. Neither of them breathed. The knock repeated. Again, 3 times. Quietly, insistently, with the same vile, damp intonation. Now it was closer. It seemed the source of the knocking wasn't standing still, but was slowly, relentlessly moving along the corridor, checking every door. He is searching, Helena whispered soundlessly, her eyes finally expressing an animal, primal terror. He is looking for those who sleep poorly, who feel lonely, who hear the noise of water in the pipes and think it's just the ship's systems. Leo recoiled from the sealed door, looking at Helena with a new, chilling understanding. The journal entries, the torn-out page, her knowledge ... This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a ritual repeating over and over. And she, Dr. Helena, was not a victim, but a keeper, the warden of this terrible secret. What do we do? His voice cracked into a falsetto. We wait, Helena answered, turning off the flashlight and plunging the storeroom into utter darkness. And we don't make a sound. He must not know we are here. He must not remember this room exists. They sat in the dark, their backs pressed against the cold wall, locked in a tomb they themselves had opened. The knocking outside the infirmary door stopped. It was replaced by a quiet, shuffling movement, as if something wet and heavy was being dragged across the linoleum. Then silence. Thick, oppressive ringing. And then Leo heard it. At first barely perceptible, then clearer and clearer. Not from outside, from within. From the very depths of the ship, from its steel belly, came a quiet, multi-voiced gurgling. It was like a song, an ancient, forgotten chant, full of longing for the dark, cold depths. And in this gurgling, he caught a single, clearly repeating word, sounding in 100 voices at once, a word that made his blood run cold. Asterisk, home ... Asterisk, he looked at Helena in the dark. He couldn't see her face, but he felt her shudder with every sound. She was not his savior. She was as much a prisoner as he was. A prisoner of the ship on which an uninvited passenger lived. A passenger whose rounds were only just beginning. Asterisk, 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 they sat in the darkness for what felt like an eternity. Leo felt the cold from the steel bulkhead seeping through his clothes and freezing his spine. The gurgling chorus somewhere deep within the ship would ebb and flow, like a tidal wave marking time until an inevitable event. Helena didn't move, merged with the darkness, but Leo heard her ragged, too frequent breathing. Her chilling calm had evaporated, replaced by the same animal fear that was consuming him from within. Suddenly, from outside, right outside the door to their refuge, came a new sound. Not a knock, but a quiet, wet rustling, as if wet cloth was being slowly dragged along the corridor floor. It stopped right next to the storeroom door. Leo froze, his heart pounding somewhere in his throat, ready to burst out. He felt a drop of sweat roll down his temple. He was afraid to move, afraid even to blink Dot, and then the doorknob began to slowly, creakily turn. He stared at it, unable to look away. The latch they had bolted from the inside shuddered. The wooden door creaked, subjected to a light but constant pressure. It knew they were here. It was trying to get in. "The latch won't hold," Leo whispered, and his voice sounded unnaturally loud in the ringing silence. Helena stood up sharply, her silhouette outlined in the dark. Her movements lacked their previous emptiness, only the desperate resolve of a cornered animal. "Open it," she whispered, grabbing a heavy, rusty crowbar from the table. "What?" Leo couldn't believe his ears. "Open it and jump back. He doesn't expect us to come out. It's our only chance to break through to the lifeboats." The thought of going out to meet what stood behind the door was madness. But sitting and waiting for the door to be splintered was even greater madness. Leo, driven by pure survival instinct, rushed to the door. His fingers slid over the cold metal bolt. He took a deep breath and yanked it sharply. The door swung open. In the doorway, veiled by the dim light of the corridor's emergency lamps, stood a figure. Tall, stooped, shrouded in a wet, dark cloak with a hood hiding its face. But it wasn't fabric. The cloak was alive, shifting, woven from silt, seaweed, and something resembling eel skin. Salt water dripped from it, forming a puddle on the floor. The air filled with the smell of the ocean depths. Rotting kelp, fresh salt, and old stagnant water. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, and from under the hood, a darkness thicker than that in their refuge looked at them. "Run!" Helena shouted, dashing into the corridor and swinging the crowbar. They dashed to the left, towards the exit to the deck. Leo ran, not looking back, feeling an icy cold emanating from the creature on his back. He heard a quiet, sloshing sound behind him. It was following them. No, not walking. Gliding, its movements fluid, unnatural, like a jellyfish. The corridor seemed endless. They passed the empty reception desk, turned a corner, and saw the heavy door leading to the open deck ahead. Salvation was so close. And then, from the ventilation grate above their heads, a stream of icy, salt water poured down, blinding and knocking them off their feet. Leo slipped and fell, hitting his knee. He tried to get up, but the water, thick and oily, held him down. Helena turned to help him, and at that moment, the shadow caught up to them. It did not attack them. It simply passed by, sliding across the flooded floor. Its target was not them. Its target was the deck above, dotted with cabins of peacefully sleeping people. Helena, sobbing with rage and helplessness, threw the crowbar at the retreating figure. The tool clanged off the wet cloak, causing it no harm whatsoever. The creature didn't even turn around. No. Helena groaned, falling to her knees in the icy water. "It's going to them. Leo finally got up. He looked at the door to freedom and at the corridor where the nightmare had disappeared. Instinct screamed at him to run, to save himself while he had the chance. But the thought of the hundreds of sleeping passengers, of the children in their cribs awaiting this creature, paralyzed him. The radio, he exhaled. We need to warn the bridge. Sound the alarm. They burst into the nearest service room where a radio hung. Leo grabbed the microphone. Bridge. Bridge. This is Dr. Shaw and Assistant Leo. Sound the general alarm immediately. There is a dangerous intruder on board. Threat to passenger lives. In response, it was only the crackle of static. Then the calm, sleepy voice of the watch officer. Doctor, is everything all right? Reception is poor. Return to the infirmary. We'll send help to you. They didn't believe. No one would believe Dot. And then, throughout the ship, loud, piercing sirens blared. The alarm. But it wasn't their doing. The sirens were anti-submarine sirens, sharp, wailing. The bridge had realized something was wrong, but not what. Too late, Helena whispered, looking at the ceiling as if she could see through the decks what was happening above. He is already there. They ran out onto the deck. The night met them with an icy wind and spray from the waves. The ship continued on its way, but its rhythm had changed. It was moving through an abnormally calm, black water, like glass. And in this water, on the surface, lights began to appear. Hundreds of dim, bluish lights swimming alongside the ship, matching its course. These were not the lights of another vessel. They were alive. Leo ran to the railing and looked down. His heart sank. In the water, as far as the eye could see, people were floating. Their bodies were pale, bloated, trailing behind the ship like an entourage. Their eyes were closed, but their mouths silently whispered that same gurgling word. Home ... It was a chorus of the drowned, the escort of their master. Suddenly, from the upper decks came the first scream, piercing, full of terror. Then another, a third. The screams multiplied, merging into a deafening symphony of panic. Lights flickered in the portholes. People tried to barricade themselves in their cabins. We can't stop him, Leo said, feeling paralyzing despair grip him. We can. Helena's voice sounded unexpectedly firm. She was looking not at the upper decks, but somewhere deep into the ship. His anchor is here. His connection to this place. Patient Zero. We must find his body. His real body. And return it to the ocean. It was a mad idea, but there was no other. They rushed back deep into the ship towards the chaos. They had to push through crowds of terrified passengers in pajamas, aimlessly rushing through the corridors. The elevators weren't working. They descended staircases, going lower and lower into the service decks, into the kingdom of engine roar and ventilation hum. The air became thick, humid, and salty. Helena led him unerringly, as if pulled by an invisible thread. They found themselves in front of a massive, airtight door with a sign. Ballast Tank No. 3. Access forbidden. Here, Helena said. He always returns here. The door was locked. Leo, using a piece of pipe, broke the lock. When the door slid aside, a wave of nauseating smell hit them in the face, of rotting flesh, salt, and sea rot. Inside the tank it was dark and spacious. The water inside didn't slosh. It stood still, a black, mirror-smooth expanse. And in the middle of this underground lake, on a small island of crates and old rope, sat the figure. The same one in the wet cloak. But now its hood was thrown back. Leo's breath caught. The face was human, but distorted beyond recognition. The skin, gray, translucent, like that of a deep-sea fish. The eyes, huge, black, without pupils, reflecting only darkness. The mouth was slightly open, and black water slowly seeped from it. This was Patient Zero, not a ghost, but a physical being, mutated, transformed into something else, a conduit for what called him from the depths. The creature turned its eyeless mask towards them. It did not look surprised. Helena ... Its voice was like the sound of the surf in a seashell. You've returned. To see me home? Your home is not here, Elias, said Helena, and for the first time, genuine human pain sounded in her voice. Leo understood. She knew his name. She had treated him, and she had failed to save him. My home is wherever there is water, the creature hissed, and soon it will be home for everyone on this ship. It slowly raised its hand, and the still water in the tank rippled. From the black surface, figures began to rise, pale, listless, with empty eyes. These were the ones it had already visited tonight. They moved towards them, slowly and relentlessly. Leo, Helena shouted. The drainage system. The lever on the wall. Leo rushed to the panel she indicated, fighting off the advancing zombified passengers. They were cold and slippery to the touch. One of them, a man in a clown costume from the kids' club, grabbed his arm. Leo screamed and pulled away, leaving a piece of his shirt in its fingers. He reached the massive lever and pulled it with all his might. A deafening roar sounded. The water in the tank began to move, swirling into a giant vortex. The force holding the zombified people vanished. They fell like rag dolls and were carried towards the drain. The creature, Patient Zero, screamed. It was not a human scream, but a sound of tearing metal and bursting bubbles. It tried to hold on, but the mighty current pulled it into the drain shaft. Straight into the open ocean. Helena stood, watching as the creature that had once been her patient struggled helplessly against the element. Tears welled in her eyes. Goodbye, Elias, she whispered. With a final desperate, gurgling shriek, the creature disappeared into the black hole of the drain. The roar of the pumps died down. Silence fell in the tank, broken only by dripping water and Leo's heavy breathing. The screams on the deck ceased. The chaos subsided. The lights and the water outside went out. The threat was over. They went up to the deck, bathed in the morning sun. Passengers, exhausted and frightened but alive, were emerging from their cabins. No one understood what had happened. They announced a sudden malfunction in the stabilization system that had caused panic. Leo stood by the railing, looking at the now serene ocean. He was alive. They were all alive. He turned to Helena. Will he return? Helena looked at the horizon, her face once again a mask of professional calm, but her eyes held a deep, incurable weariness. He is part of the ocean, and the ocean ... It is always hungry. It will simply wait for the next ship, the next doctor, the next Patient Zero. She turned and walked towards the infirmary to tend to the survivors. Leo watched her go, understanding that the true nightmare was not the creature in the ballast tank. The true nightmare was the knowledge that the darkness beneath the water is alive, hungry, and has infinite patience. And that on the next voyage, in the next storm, he would once again hear that quiet, wet knock on his door.